Start the recording. And here we go. And please stop me if you have questions. And we can also wait till the end. So this is the live session for Module 3 for Market 690. All right, why isn't that working? There we go. All right, so the things that we're going to be discussing tonight are participation and assignments. I believe that participating early in the week is the best thing to do. You never know what the end of the week has in store for you, whether it be weather related, that your friends need you for something, that work says you have to be in over the weekend, that you're not feeling well, that your computer breaks down, your internet connection is lost, or something with family. So the earlier in the week you participate, the better it will be for you. Plus, you can focus on papers at the end of the week. Just an interesting statistic, on 27% of the postings for this week were done on Sunday afternoon. I logged out around noon, and that was between noon and midnight on Sunday. There were 27% of the postings for the class. It's important for you to read announcements. I usually post those on Monday morning. There's helpful hints in it about what's upcoming for the week and tips for your papers. It's important that you look at any emails that I send and, excuse me, that you use the grading rubrics. In the announcement this morning, I included the grading rubrics for this week's assignment. It's important that you use them because if you don't, you're going to miss something. And if all you read is the write-up in the learning module, you're missing something because sometimes things are in the rubric that are not there. So some helpful hints. Use citations and references on your postings. Citations and references help demonstrate that you understand and can apply the concepts. Citations and references are required on initial postings and are a best practice on engagement postings. Avoid Google, and that really means any search engine. The first things that come up in Google tend to be purchase paper sites and other sites that are not good sources for schoolwork and quite frankly for your job either. Blogs are one of the first things that come up in Google, and blogs are basically someone's opinion, and if you don't know who's written the blog, don't use it. Site selling services are also usually on page 1 of Google, and while they have great information, it's all information to try and get you to buy their point of view, their products, so it's not a good source. The textbook and business journal articles are excellent sources. It's important that you do more than just report on what you've read or just provide quotes. Quotes do not demonstrate that you understand the concepts. You need to apply and analyze. Apply it to the situation that you're talking about and analyze, which means going beyond the obvious, sharing insights, developing conclusions. Last Monday, in my Monday morning announcement, I provided a definition of substantive. All of your participation postings should be substantive. Blogs, Wikipedia, dictionaries, encyclopedias, site selling services, cheat sites, those are all not good sources. Dictionaries and encyclopedias are good for middle school, not for grad level work. If you would not use a source as a basis for a raise or a promotion, don't use it in class. In writing your postings, use some paragraphs and white space. There were a couple of postings this week that were very long, hard to read paragraphs, or one paragraph. Make it much easier to read. Use white spaces. If you have opinions and experience, support it with sources. Experience and opinion are not enough. If you look at the rubric for participation, it talks about developed insights using supporting evidence. So you should use supporting evidence even if it is your opinion. Be sure your citations and references match. If your reference is listed by the author, your citation needs to be also. Make sure the dates match. If you list the reference by the author, don't list the citation by the title. They have to match. Be sure you're focused on content. This is especially important for engagement postings. Too many of the engagement postings are just conversational. I think, I believe, I feel, my experience. It should be more about the content and more academic. Initial postings are due by Thursday by 11:59 p.m. This week we had a break because of the short holiday week and everything was due on Sunday, but we go back to Thursday for the rest of the course. Engagement postings and other assignments are due on Sunday by 11:59 p.m. What are we looking for when we say substantive? Depth and details. One sentence is not depth. Explain what you mean. Use examples. Insights is also something that is on the rubric. Develop insightful conclusions. Make sure that you do that. You don't just report. Compare and contrast ideas. Apply and analyze. I already mentioned that. These are important concepts that should be both in your papers and in your participation. Textbook citation is Cornelissen, I think that's how you say that name, which is easy because it's one author, but if there are two authors, both authors should be in every citation. A marketing textbook that I use for another course is Kotler and I can't remember the second author now. But both authors, well, there's one, Armstrong and Kotler. I'll use that one. Armstrong and Kotler, both authors have to be in every citation. You add the page or paragraph number for quotes. Here's the proper reference listing for your textbook. List the references alphabetically, and that is by the first word of the reference. If you had a book that was written by Taylor, Green, and Apple, you would not change the order to Apple, Green, and Taylor. By alphabetical, it means the first author that's listed. The order in which the authors are listed means something. The one who's first contributed the most, so you should not change that order. Be sure citations and references match. And you're using the publication date. You do not use a download date. If there's no source on the publication, use N period, D period, which stands for no date. And by the way, sources without a date are probably not the best sources to use. Okay, discussion board 3. Once again, there are 2 threads, and once again, you are using your selected and approved company. Reply to at least 1 internal and 1 external with content suggestions. That's for your engagement postings. Use the peer review rubric, which I also sent out with this morning's announcement. For the milestone 2 you're using, for the milestone 2 scenario, you're looking at your company and you're looking at poor working conditions at an overseas supplier. This is not an overseas subsidiary, it's a supplier. And the working conditions could be child labor, it could be that people are working too many hours, they're not paid enough. There's several examples given in the rubric. You can pick one, you can pick more than one. You can make the whole thing up. It doesn't have to be something that actually happened. You can say that, let's say Coca-Cola has an overseas supplier that their working conditions are unsafe. I don't know that Coca-Cola has that. I'm just using that as an example, as something that can be made up. Determine the most effective communication method for both the internal and external audience. Identify who that audience is. Pick one stakeholder group, because especially for external, the customers, the shareholders, and the community don't have the same information needs. So pick one. You don't need to. Aren't going to necessarily send something for all of them. Excuse me. Identify the target audience and what do they need. As I said, customers don't need the same information as investors. Employees may not need the same information as a board of directors. You're going to write an internal and external communication. You're going to post that, and then you're going to pick someone else's internal and external communication that they wrote and you're going to review it. You're focusing on content. You're not doing copy editing. You're making meaningful suggestions for improvement, or you're asking appropriate questions. You're commenting on key points. The best thing to do is to use the editing tool in Word and attach it as your review. Again, I'm not looking for copy editing. Focus on what content doesn't make sense, that they didn't really address the needs of that audience, that you're not clear what they're saying. So those are the kinds of things that you could put in your review. This is just a heads up for you. Module 5, the initial posting is due on Monday. I'm going to do this heads up several times because I don't know why it's due on Monday, but it is. Milestone 2 paper. These are the elements of it. You're going to have a communication context, which is an overview of your scenario. This is what's happening with the overseas supplier. Communication need, explain your stakeholder group's needs for information. For the internal communication, you're going to talk about the type of communication. Is it going to be internally something on the intranet? Is it going to be a memo? Is it going to be an email? Is it going to be a town hall meeting? How are you going to communicate with people? What's the purpose? Is it informational, educational, or persuasive? That is defined in the rubric. Justify why you've chosen that strategy. Identify the target audience and explain them and justify it. And then you're going to use that same draft communication that you posted in class. Hopefully you're going to make some changes to it and you're going to add that to your paper. You can do that within the paper, or it's also effective to do it as an appendix. For the external communication, you're going to do the same thing. Type of communication. One type that people often use for external is a press release. What I sent to you today, also in the announcement, was a format and directions for press releases. You're going to, again, the purpose, justifications, target audience, and again, the draft communication. And finally, your last section is the conditions communication strategy, which basically you're summarizing why this approach was the best and what other things were considered. So now what I've done is I have outlined for you how you might put this into APA format. So the first responsibility was communication context. I make that a heading. Communication need, I make that a heading. Internal communication, I make that a heading. And then I have a subheading or level 2 heading, type and purpose, target audience, and then the draft. And I can again put that in the appendix or in the body of the paper. External communication, and then I would use the same thing I did for internal. Conditions, communication strategy, and references. I think the best thing you can do is start off by putting down all of the requirements of the paper. That does 2 things for you. Number 1, it outlines the paper. And number 2, it makes sure that you include all of the requirements of the paper. APA format, use the cover page. Use at least 3 main headings. And if I go back to the previous slide, you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 main headings. I've also used the level 2 headings, which are optional for you. I like using them because it helps me to see that I have done everything I need to do. And a summary. APA rules, avoid first person, you, your, and contractions. Double space the paper. Be sure citations and references match. Use the last name and the publication date for the citation. Add the page paragraph number to the citation for quotes. And use the hanging indent format for the reference page, which means the second or third line or fourth is indented, not the first line. The first line is in the margin. Writing. Avoid superlatives. All, every, never, always, best. These words are rarely true and difficult to prove. If you say this company has never done that, how do you know? Do you have the entire history? If you say the company will always be concerned with working conditions, how do you know? Can you predict the future? If you say every employee It's rare that every employee agrees about anything. Avoid very. Important is a good word. Critical is a good word, but putting very in front of it doesn't make it any more important or critical. Unique means there's only one of a kind. So therefore, what does very unique mean? It doesn't mean anything. Avoid unnecessary adjectives like great and perfect. Write clearly and concisely. If it can be said in 10 words, don't say it in 50. I'm much more concerned about content than word count. Watch for wordos, and I'll explain that in a minute. Avoid rhetorical questions. Do not end sentences with a preposition like in, on, with, for. Eliminate empty phrases, which I'll also explain. Do not start sentences with also and use also only once in a paragraph. Cliches and generality should be avoided, and I will also explain that. So here we go, wordos. Wordos are words that are spelled correctly, but it's the wrong word. Weather and weather. Manager and manger. You wouldn't believe how many mangers work in companies. Since and since. There and there is often wrong. And then you have the there contraction, but you shouldn't use contractions. Then and then. Then is sequential, then is comparison. One I see all the time is lose and loose. People seem to get that one wrong a lot. And there are a lot more wordos than this. These are just some of the ones I see more frequently. Cliches. Cliches are empty phrases. We tend to use them a lot when we're speaking. They have no value. Last but not least, first and foremost, easier said than done. In this day and age, the rest is history. Read between the lines. They have no meaning. Avoid them in writing. Unnecessary phrases. Due to the fact that. Use since. In this day and age. Use today. As well as. Use and. In order to. Use to. When it comes to and for all intents and purposes, don't say they're meaningless. And most people get all intents and purposes wrong and write all intensive purposes. Generalities all over the world. How do you know? Everyone would agree. Doubtful. I've never seen something where everyone agreed. This company will never. How do you know? Apple is worldwide. There are places in the world with no electricity. I don't think those people have Apple phones and Apple computers or other devices. Salespeople lie to make money. That may be true of some salespeople, but it's not a proven fact. It is more of a belief. Everyone loves Disney. I live in Florida. Not everyone loves Disney. I do. Redundant expressions, extremely unique. Unique is one of a kind, so how can it be any more than unique? A necessary need. It's necessary, it's needed, but it's not a necessary need. New innovation. Innovations wouldn't be old. Past history. History wouldn't be future. Two twins is 4 people. Twins already means 2. I think the only one that I can think of who can say 2 twins is Roger Federer, because he's got 2 sets. And completely unanimous. How much more can it be than unanimous that everyone agrees? Apply the 4C filter to your paper before you turn it in. Is it clear? Can I follow your thoughts? Is it well organized? Is it concise? Did you say it in as few words as possible? If it can be said in 10, did you use 50? Is it cogent? Is it based on evidence? Did you use sources? Is it comprehensive? Did you address all the requirements? Again, use every requirement as a heading to make sure it is comprehensive. Peer-reviewed articles are reviewed by experts in the field. I know that sometimes your assignment says you need peer-reviewed articles. I'm asking you for business journal articles, not peer-reviewed. Sometimes peer-reviewed takes over a year to get published. It's based on empirical research. They're harder to read. The articles are longer. Use business journal articles. They're easier to read. They're more up to date. I think they provide greater help with writing papers. They're easily accessible in the library. And business journal websites tend to allow you to use, at least without a subscription, the most recent edition. So Business Week, Fast Company, Forbes, Fortune, Inc., WSJ, Wall Street Journal are all.com. HBR is .org. And those are all also in the library. Best practices. Use one source per paragraph or section. Paraphrase rather than quote. Quoting tells me you knew how to find a quote. Paraphrasing shows me that you understand the concept and can apply it. This is probably the most important thing I can tell you. Read your paper aloud before submitting. When we read to ourselves, we miss things we did wrong. If we read it aloud, we will find the errors. Do more than report on topics. Review feedback from previous papers and make adjustments, and compare your paper to the rubric before submitting to make sure you did everything the way you want to make sure you did it right. The 1-7 announcement from this morning has the rubric for this week, has tips for writing papers, has a press release format for possible external communication, and links for APA. So there's lots of information provided in the announcement from this morning. And be sure that if you have questions, you ask before 10 p.m. on Sunday, because I'm done by then. I'm not going back in. And if you have a question about your paper that you post at 11 o'clock and hope that I'm going to answer you in time for you to complete by 11:59, doubtful. If you have a problem, if something's gone on, let me know immediately, because in advance is a reason, after the fact is an excuse. If something unusual has happened, I can probably grant you an extension without penalty, but you got to tell me in advance. Word to the wise, it's better to submit an assignment late than not submit at all. It's easier to keep up than catch up. You know, this was a great week since it was the holiday week, and it's unusual that the holiday week falls on the same week when no paper is due. You lucked out this time. Doesn't always happen. And so it wasn't as difficult, but moving forward, there's an assignment almost every week. And now, any questions?
Not for me, Dr. Roddy. This is Amy.
All set, Amy? So how about you, Nicole? I'll put the chat back on, see if there's anything. So no other questions? Okay, then I'm going to stop the recording.